Welcome to Washington Maritime Careers. I'm Ann Avery, Director of the Center of Excellence for Marine Manufacturing and Technology. With me today is Sloane Perras. Sloane is Vice President of Foss Offshore Wind. Sloane, thank you so much for joining us today. First question is to ask you to tell us a little bit about your role with Foss Offshore Wind.
Sure. As the Vice President for Supply in Foss Offshore Wind, I'm responsible for the development and execution of our port strategy. My job is to identify potential port sites, create a tenant base, and then develop a business case for development through operation. Our first site right now is under construction in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and it will be the first private offshore wind terminal, or it is the first private offshore wind terminal in the U.S. That is a multi-tenant site.
We also know that today, Foss Offshore Wind is a leading provider of installation, laydown, and supply and transportation services for the U.S. offshore wind industry. Sloane, can you talk a little bit about the history of the U.S. offshore wind industry and why Foss chose to be one of the first companies involved in this sector?
So offshore wind has been going on inside the U.S. for 15 years. People think it's brand new, but the truth is, it's been underway for a very long time, and it's had its starts and stops. The first offshore wind farm was off of Rhode Island, and it was called Block Island. And currently, there are 4 offshore wind farm projects either completed or underway on the East Coast between Connecticut and Massachusetts. Everybody sees the negative in the papers. What people don't hear as much is the positive, of course, and how many jobs that the offshore wind industry is creating and what sort of opportunities it provides, not just for maritime companies like us, but companies throughout the economy, whether you're manufacturing, consulting, engineering, but also all of the people support services, so restaurants, hotels, healthcare. Offshore wind tends to find space in smaller towns, and that gives the town the opportunity to grow. That growth potential and that ability to give back to the community is kind of part of the ethos of our parent company, Saltcheck. And so when Foss was looking for opportunities to expand its business lines, renewable energy seemed like an obvious place for our companies to diversify into. We've been working on offshore wind for probably 8 or 9 years now. It's been a long road, but we are delighted to be part of the installation process of the first commercially sized scale wind farm in the United States, which is Vineyard Wind 1. Not only are we providing the tug and barge transportation services, which is part of our traditional service offering, but also our terminal in New Bedford, Massachusetts. It's providing support and coordination to the main construction terminal.
That is amazing. And you kind of started along the lines of one of my next questions, but I'm going to expand on something because it sounds like Foss's role in the U.S. wind farm offshore wind industry is starting to expand or morph a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about that and perhaps even share a little bit about some of the current projects? And for a lot of folks that are going to be watching this, I know they're going to be very interested in the West Coast. Can you relate any of that to what's happening or might be happening on the West Coast of the U.S.?
Sure. So at the moment, I think everybody knows that most of the offshore wind is happening on the East Coast. And so Foss is involved both on the traditional maritime transportation side, but also the supply and laydown for our port development project. And then we have a unique expertise in our company. Our president came out of the cable, marine IT industry. And what he brings to the table is a gap in the US knowledge market, and that's the support of cable laying for offshore wind. So if you looked at the picture of the ocean bottom right now, you would see cables running between all of the continents. And that's how our telephones and our internet work. And that's how we're all interconnected in this global world. So offshore wind cables are just another type of cable that's going to go on the ocean bed floor. But the way an offshore wind farm sends its electricity to shore is through these cables. And with Foss's maritime experience and strong mariner workforce, we will actually be able to provide support to the large cable installation vessels with, they're called PSVs, performance service vessels, and anchor handling tugs, and really open up a U.S. market for a new career for mariners on these types of vessels, as traditionally this work has been done by European companies. For the West Coast, Foss is, of course, we're a Washington State headquartered company, and we have a long history over 135 years in Washington State, and we are very invested in the growth in the West Coast. It's going to be a little bit different than what you see in the East Coast. The East Coast is fixed bottom, and so there's a foundation that's actually driven into the ocean floor. On the West Coast, because of our continental shelf, the waters are very, very deep and, of course, very, very cold, as anyone knows who's run into the water from the beach. So on the West Coast, we'll deploy what's called floating wind, and that will actually be a steel or concrete platform that floats on the surface of the water and is tethered by cables that run to anchors to the ocean floor. And because of the needs of utility on the West Coast, and to make the floating wind farms economical, they will be much, much larger than what you see on the East Coast right now. So on the East Coast, we're installing 13 megawatt turbines. The blades are 400 feet long. What we'll actually see on the West Coast will be 20 to 25 megawatt turbines, and the height of the turbine will be taller than the Golden Gate Bridge. So where we're currently at the kind of the top of the Eiffel Tower, now we're going even higher and expanding the size of the blades. So instead of being 300 to 350 feet long, they'll be closer to 450 feet long. And the platform itself, if we think about the Seahawks Stadium in downtown Seattle, the platform is so big it will rest on the top of the stadium, so the upper deck. So the sheer magnitude and size of offshore wind, floating wind on the West Coast is truly a nascent part of the industry that is not in place anywhere in the world. And the benefit of California taking this early lead in offshore wind is that the U.S. has traditionally been a groundbreaker in new types of technology. Think about, as far back as the automobile or the light bulb. The U.S. has always had very innovative and entrepreneurial people and companies that have dedicated research, time, and energy to creating new technologies that end up bettering people all over the world. So I think the West Coast and the kind of growth and development and commercialization of floating wind will be super exciting, and there will be roles for everyone on the West Coast and really across the United States to participate in that economy that's going to be driven out of it.
That is absolutely fascinating. The scale is, I was really glad when you mentioned Seahawks Stadium because it lets you put something in your mind's eye to understand the scale of this. It's fascinating. And this really leads me to the next question. And this is something that we get a lot in our role relative to maritime workforce development. I get two common questions. One is, the economic impact of offshore wind and the workforce impact of offshore wind, the job creation potential. So Sloane, could you talk a little bit about both of those, economic impacts or projected economic impacts, and what types of family wage jobs might this new sector, not new, but emerging sector or maturing sector, whatever the right word is, would create for the industry?
Well, I think floating wind is definitely an emerging sector.
Yeah.
So if you took a 1 gigawatt, so 1,000 megawatt wind farm, which is about kind of a starting size for floating wind on the West Coast, and you looked at all the steel that would be necessary to create the turbines, the towers, possibly the platforms, the cable lines, the anchors, and then the cables to shore, that would be all the steel that's available in the world today. So just one wind farm could consume our current projected steel that's available. So what this is going to do to the US economy and really the global economy is it's going to cause a reversal of the tightening of manufacturing. It's going to create growth in manufacturing jobs, growth in assembly jobs. And we're not talking about just big component pieces, but this is going to trickle all the way down the supply chain to the nuts and bolts that have to go in and hold pieces in place and together. So the opportunity for workforce development is huge. In the last kind of generation, we have gradually evolved away from what people called blue collar manufacturing or maritime jobs. There's been a heavy emphasis on STEM and on 4-year degrees. And that works great for a lot of people, but it doesn't work great for everyone. And I think that floating wind on the West Coast is going to revitalize our manufacturing economy and create a larger variety of industries than what we currently are reliant on today. And those will be high paying, skilled trade jobs. Many, if not most of them, will be union jobs. And they will be the type of jobs where people can support a family and have a lifestyle that is not hand to mouth and fearing your next mortgage payment. So I think right now it would we should be reaching out into schools and into our local communities and educating people on these jobs that are coming and talking to both our large businesses, but also all of our small businesses that make up parts of the supply chain and educate them on when this is coming. Now, it's not going to come tomorrow in 2025. There is a ramp up time that's going to be a couple of years, but that gives us all time to kind of plan for this expansion and to create innovative technology to lessen the impact of this expansion of manufacturing on the minerals and the materials that come from the earth. Because we have to keep in mind that offshore wind is both meeting a need for increased utility, but it's also supposed to be lessening our carbon footprint. And so we want to continue to innovate in technology so that it does, in fact, lessen the carbon footprint and doesn't cause more harm than good. And so that's going to require a lot of innovative thinkers. So all of those people who are invested in STEM and are looking at 4-year and graduate degrees, they have a place in this economy as well. And that's really what's unique about offshore wind, and what will be unique about floating wind, is that it will touch on everyone. It will provide jobs for those who are in STEM and want 4-year degrees and want to sit behind a desk. And it will provide jobs for people who don't want to sit behind a desk and don't want to live on a computer, and they want to work with their hands, and they want to be able to go outside during the day, and they want to sail on a vessel. And so what I think is really unusual about floating wind in particular is the kind of broad impact it's going to have both domestically but also internationally, because no one country, no one state, no one city is going to be able to handle all the work that's coming through. It's going to take a globally connected economy to make it successful, at least in my opinion, which is not the opinions of Foss Offshore Wind.
We'll have an official disclaimer. No, I loved what you said on all points, but particularly the supply chain piece, and that this will include a lot of smaller companies in that supply chain ecosystem, and then the need to prepare and begin thinking about what the training and educational opportunities and requirements are going to be, because it's never too early to plan for that. And again, that's not the opinion of the state of Washington, it's Ann Avery's opinion, but so we'll share that. But I think that's really, really important. So before we get to our last question, I know people want to learn more about offshore wind. They're going to want to know more about Foss. Where can they go to learn more about Foss Offshore Wind?
Well, to learn more about our company, you can go to our website, which is pretty easy. It's www.fossoffshorewind.com.
Right.
And if you want to learn more about offshore wind in general, there are two trade associations. One is called Oceantic, and one is ACP, American Clean Power Offshore Wind Division. And both of them have a lot of material available for people to read about. And then I have to give credit to the state of New Jersey, which has done a really good job of laying out a sustainable pipeline of projects. And so if you look, it is fixed bottom, not floating, but looking at New Jersey will kind of give you an idea of a very active, supportive political establishment and communities that are pushing forward with the offshore wind. And so the Economic Development Authority there has done a lot of publications around it. So I think there are a lot of resources online. There's a lot of free resources where you can learn about the pros and cons of offshore wind, because every renewable energy, every energy source, everything we do will have pros and cons, and we should educate ourselves about both.
Looking at your background right now, I'm seeing a lot of interesting things. Can you talk a little bit about that? It's fascinating.
Sure. This is the terminal I mentioned in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I'll duck for a minute.
Okay. There you go.
This is a multi-tenant facility, so it is on a about a 26-acre site. It's an incredible history. The site was originally used for whaling, which was our original oil, our fuel source. And then over time, the site, the utility company built a large powerhouse on the site, and it was fueled by coal. And then the coal was converted to natural gas. And then the last piece is we coordinated with the city and the state to demolish this very old powerhouse and rejuvenate the site for offshore wind. And so this site's history has gone through the entire evolution of our energy use in this country. And so it's New Bedford is a historical town, of course. Moby Dick was based out of New Bedford, and this this site in particular has seen all of that. This is a multi-tenant site, so it will have 3 to 4 anchor tenants, which are generally developers. So the company that is responsible for the power purchase agreement with the state. Along with that, it will have 3 to 4 deep water berths for service operation vessels, which can stay out from 14 days to 30 days at a time at the wind farm. And then it will have smaller berths for CTVs, which are crew transport vessels, which go out every day and come back every day. And this parcel will have not only warehouses on it, but it will have office space. There's a historical building called the Foundry Building on there, and it has 30,000 square feet of what will eventually be Class A office space. It will have a terminal center where workers up to 100 a day come in to change their shift. They can shower, change their clothes, get their schedule for the next 2 weeks. There will be cafes on the site for people to grab lunch, although it's within walking distance of downtown. And it will run a shuttle to the airports in Boston and Providence for people who fly in and out. Our long-term mariners often live all over the country. They rarely live locally in any one place. So there's a ton of opportunity with the site, and we've really we're going to give it a facelift and create a feel where people can interact and come on the site and learn about offshore wind and see it as they drive by every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And finally, we're to our last question. I could talk to you for 2 more hours about this. It's such a fascinating and timely topic. But can you share a little bit with us on 2 points? Why you're optimistic about the future of offshore wind, and then the maritime sector overall?
The reason I'm optimistic about the future of offshore wind is that I am a firm believer that we need to diversify our energy base. I believe that we need as many tools in our toolkit as possible. So there will be a place for fossil fuel use for a long time until we have technology and greater ability to transition away from that. Solar is very viable and is very well deployed on land, but it takes up a lot of space, and it takes up agricultural land, which is a challenge. Offshore wind comes with less impacts. And I think that the scale of floating wind at that 20 to 25 megawatt, it means there's less in the water. You don't have as many turbines, you don't have as many foundations. And I believe with the kind of advent of AI and the really exorbitant need of utility of electricity by IT companies, by all the technology companies that we rely on every day, we're going to have to create as many different forms of electricity as possible, and we would be hard pressed not to utilize offshore wind because of its reliability and stability compared to other types of renewable energy. I've been involved in the maritime sector off and on for 20 years, my entire career. And I just think there's always a place in our world for vessels. It's always going to be the most economical way to move things between continents, between countries, between different parts of the world. I don't see aviation quite catching up and becoming a low cost method of the global supply chain. And so as we see the global economy grow, and offshore wind will be another driver of that, the maritime sector will have to keep up. And as I talk to younger people who are in school or who are trying to think of what career they want, I've noticed that there are a lot of that this generation coming up is doesn't really want to kind of hear how we did it, and they really want to kind of break their own path, and that's going to mean office jobs for some, but for others, they're really resistant to being tied to a computer. And so I think that we can funnel people who want to be near the water and on the water for harbor towage day jobs with a good work-life balance, with longer term maritime jobs where you work 30 or 45 days on and then 30 or 45 days off. And then, of course, the fishing industry where you may work, 3 months of fishing and then you have the rest of the year off. I think people are looking for that type of flexibility in their lifestyles. And I think that the maritime industry provides a huge amount of flexibility to pick what type of day or what type of life that you want. And so I think that we can easily encourage people to look at it as a career, especially as they are really good paying jobs. And they do support families with these jobs, which you don't always get when you graduate college and go into an entry level position.
That is so true, that the maritime industry represents a virtual wealth of opportunity, no matter what your interests might be. So that I really so appreciate that. Sloane, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and learn from you. This has been so much fun. I wish we could spend more time together, and I hope in the future we can do another interview together. This work is absolutely amazing. And we really appreciate your time. So thank you.
It is my pleasure, and I'm happy to do it anytime that you want to hear me ramble on.
Then I will take you up on that. That is for sure. You know what? This is such a fascinating topic. There's so much interest in it that there's a real thirst for people to want to learn more about it. So we really appreciate your time today. This has been absolutely fantastic.
My pleasure.